We tend to run Runway as a neural network. We build Runway, the organization, almost as a model itself. And then what I mean by that is the way you train a model is you gather data, you have some weights, you use the data to modify the weights, and then based on what you get, you can kind of like keep on doing that all the time. You gather more data, you modify the weights, and that produces some sort of like that's useful. So if you think of a company in a very similar way, you have weights and like networks, connections between different people that as more data comes in, you can start adjusting and you adjust them based on the results that you get. I think Runway in a way operates pretty much like that, where we're looking for people that can change their weights and the way they work with others as new data comes in and adjust them to get better at exactly what they're doing. And that requires a special mindset. Like if you need to be able to be comfortable with adjusting your weights. If you're very fixated on how you've done things in the past and you have very strong priors and biases around how organizations work, then you're not going to work at Runway.
Hey, Chris, I'm so excited to have you on and to chat about Runway today. Thank you for joining.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for the invitation.
I actually remember a few years ago, before I joined Amplify, I was getting dinner with Sarah in New York, and she was on her way back from Brooklyn from hanging out with you guys. This was when you were just 3 founders before any generative AI hype cycle. And I remember this random fact because she was telling me like, oh, they're so cool and describing how unique your team composition was because you're artists and technologists. And so that really stood out. And here, just a few years later, it's kind of crazy to see all that you've built and how you've kept that DNA core to the company. When I think about Runway, I think a lot of the power is like playing with it or seeing demos, almost like art. But I'd be curious with your words, if you were explaining Runway to someone at a dinner party, what would you say it is?
Yeah. And I think we're still pretty much operating on those same like principles and visions where we first met Sarah, I don't know, 6-7 years ago. Really what we're trying to make is tools for like storytelling. We're helping people tap into their creative potential and find ways that models and technology can help you express yourself. So we have a core research team and foundational of some really incredible technologies, but most importantly, these are tools for like artists and creatives and anyone who wants to find ways of like making come alive their like ideas and stories. And so we are in the service of imagination. We're a technology company, but really we're more like a company devoted to storytelling more than anything else.
I love that. And I think given how unique your background is, studied economics and business and arts and design and contributed to open source, you've reached this almost perfect intersection with how you're doing your life's work. I'm curious, growing up in Chile, what did you think you wanted to be when you grew up? Was it a founder of a company that's advancing imagination, or was it something different?
No, absolutely not. I don't think I knew that like starting a company was even something remotely possible. Chile it's a very traditional country. It's very conservative, and there's like predefined like things you can do mostly, and it's very rare to do things that break the norm or go outside of the 4 or 5 careers everyone studies. And so I didn't grow up in a place where I had a lot of ideas or references or mentors that could guide me into something different. But I think I was just curious about life and like work. I'm obsessed with learning and like feeling like you can learn anything if you just want to spend the right time devoting yourself to it. And I think that led me to where we are and what we built. It wasn't, again, I've never thought I was going to be able to do and start a company because I don't think it was within the scope of what I think the things I could accomplish. But I think over time, I guess you realize that like you can just do things. You can just learn how to do things. And if you have that mentality over time, I think the superpower is really the fact that you can realize that you can learn how to learn, and that unlocks a lot of potential.
Was there a moment, because you moved to New York, to NYU, where you thought, okay, I know I'm going to start Runway, the company, and I know I want to start it with Anastasis and Alejandro? Like, was there an aha moment, or was it, I guess, the aggregation of learning to learn and being curious?
I mean, there was definitely a moment where we're like, this is, guys, we should do this together. We're working on these cool ideas and we should find ways of like working on it full time. But when I moved to New York, I wasn't thinking about, again, it wasn't in the realm of what I thought was possible to start a company. I went to art school and I was just fascinated by what neural networks are able to do. And I wanted to spend time just researching them. There was not a clear objective in mind. I didn't came thinking that I will find a job or start a company. But I think over time, we just enjoy working with each other. And we wanted to find a way of doing it forever or for as long as we could. And it was kind of clear that there was only one path for like doing it sustainable, which is like we should start a company. But then the other was just like, can we actually start a company? How do you start a company? Like we've never done this. We're just like building and researching and building demos and software. But I think it was more of the inspiration. Was like, well, we'll figure out something and we'll eventually like, I mean, how hard could it be? And then it's hard, but you can do it. And I think that was the moment. It was like, we should just find a way. I think the moment was like, we should find a way of working on this for as long as we can and do it together.
We have this thing we talk about internally, the figure it out gene, the ability to just figure out what you need to do when you have some objective and run through walls. And so a lot of great founders are in that mindset. So I know that Runway, the ethos of the team and serving imagination and creativity has always been there. I don't know how widely known this is, but Runway actually began as a marketplace for ML models and plugins. Could you actually just walk me through why you started a company there and then what decisions led to, or pivots led to Runway in its current form?
So there are two parts to that question. One is the longer term aspects and strategy and vision of what we're building. And then there's the short term, more industry specific thing for any particular year, month, or week. So long term, we've always thought of like these tools, and if you go back to like our thesis at school and our first website and our first like product, it was really taking this AI models and making them as useful and as accessible to artists and creatives. That's a core of who we are and why we started doing this. This is why we started the company. This is it's models are a new ways of thinking and seeing the world, and I truly believe they should be as accessible and as useful and as liberating for artists as they can. But the thing is, like, that's a great vision. It's a very romantic vision of like hopefully technology serving like humans. But together you need to build and you need to start with like stepping stones, right? It's not that you from day one you accomplish your vision just because you set up to build it. It's actually very hard to get there, and together you have to start with like small improvements, small stepping stones. And so when we started, there wasn't really too much of an infrastructure on the AI side. There wasn't really a consolidated set of frameworks or inference pipelines or best practices as to how to build, deploy, and train models. And so the first thing we started was like, well, let's start with the basics. Let's start taking open source models and make them much more accessible for creative practices. And so we build a set of containers and systems where you can run Docker files and Docker containers and deploy them both to the cloud, to your computer. The idea basically still emphasizing the creative obligations of those models. And the realization was like, we'll need to build this to get to where we need to go, but we can just like take something off the shelf because it doesn't exist. And so the first versions of Runway were more focused on delivering the first infrastructure that was needed to build the larger versions of Runway. And so it was, the product itself was a model zoo or a model hub where you had hundreds of thousands of different, I think at some point we had like 1,000 or so different models where you could just click them and run them. And this is like 7 years ago, so 6 years ago. So it was pretty new at the time. I think it was great. People love it, but that was a transitory stage. We were never thinking about that as the core product we wanted to build, because that's not truly what we wanted to build. That was just step forward and a stepping stone. And so we kept changing. And even now, if you think of Runway as the product that we have now, I still think that's not the final product. And we're very far from it still, because there's too much that has to change, that has to improve. And so it will continue to change. And maybe we'll have this conversation in a couple of years and we'll look back and it's like, what do you think about the product now? And I feel the same as I felt about the model.
Oh, it's transitory too. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, I have a lot of questions about that. Maybe before we get into, some of these decisions around like how do you balance pushing the boundaries versus optimizing existing models versus what's transitory and will become obsolete. Let's use a concrete example, which is, you recently launched Gen 3 Alpha. Every time you all release a model, it's a mic drop moment, both in media and in AI research. I remember when you released the Gen 1 model in, I think it was in early 2023, and it allowed you to use words and images to generate new videos out of existing ones. And my mind was blown. And I remember one of the things that really surprised me was learning how small your research team was at the time for what you had shipped and delivered. And so I'm curious to learn a little bit about that. Like, how do you balance, to your point, there are things that need to be done at certain points in time. How do you balance research with shipping and fast product development? In what way do they work together, and how do you split the company across these axes?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it all goes back to like culture and how you assemble the teams. It's I don't think there's one concrete answer to say like if you do this, then therefore this other thing will happen. I think it's more of an intuition and a set of practices that you've accumulated over time. It's an art, like to understand what to focus on and what to like build at any given time. I think more importantly is I think long term for us has been a strategy and a constant, which is we're not building video models, we're not building image models, we're not really building we're in a path around making the models become extensions of your mind. To do that, you need to get to good image qualities, to great video consistency and resolutions. But those things over time are just, again, functions of something larger. And I think it's the reminding of the team, like that vision overall. It's a cultural element. And I think it's how you operate as a company. Like you don't need hundreds of thousands of engineers to do this. Like you just need very focused, talented, and obsessive people who care a lot about what they do. And I think we care too much about what we do.
Part of why I ask this is because we see a lot of companies now that want to balance research and product in some way. And I don't think a lot of companies have done this, or, of course there are leaders here, but there are many more now that want to figure out this balance between research and product. Is there something different in what you look for, either in engineers or in researchers, when you're building a company like this and you need them to work together and figure it out in this way?
I've been thinking about this, but I think we tend to run Runway as a neural network. We build Runway, the organization, almost as a model itself. And what I mean by that is the way you train a model is you gather data, you have some weights, you use the data to modify the weights, and then based on what you get, you can kind of like keep on doing that all the time. You gather more data, you modify the weights, and that produces some sort of like output that's useful. So if you think of a company in a very similar way, you have weights and like networks or connections between different people that as more data comes in, you can start adjusting. And you adjust them based on the results that you get. And so I think Runway in a way operates pretty much like that, where we're looking for people that can change their weights and the way they work with others as new data comes in, and adjust them to get better at exactly what they're doing. And that requires a special mindset. Like if you need to be able to be comfortable with adjusting your weights. If you're very fixated on how you've done things in the past and you have very strong priors and biases around how organizations work, then you're not going to work at Runway. It's not going to work.
How do you actually test for that though? Like, do you just put them in and you see, can you change when there is some change needed? Or I'd imagine there's something in the interview.
Yeah, there are ways of signaling and identifying the people who have very strong biases and very strong opinions around how everything should work. And one thing that I think we've learned over time with neural networks is that you can codify and have all these inductive biases around the world that you can find the rules, but really if you just train larger models with like more data and do it in a efficient manner, like the model will learn much more things around the world than any of the rules that you can hard code. And so you want to look for people that kind of like think of that with that in their lives, in their professional lives, in their work life. And I think there are a few things that are common in people who can constantly be adjusting their weights. They're humble. They're very humble. They care about the work that they do. They care about intellectual like curiosity. They care about the why you're doing it, and that drives a lot of the motivation forward of how they continue to do it. And they care about like working with others as well. Again, a neural network is composed of many different nodes, and those nodes need to have knowledge like spread among those connections. And so if you're not able to work with other people, then those connections are not really going to work with one another. And so you look for those things, I think.
I love this analogy. And actually, it's interesting because on the one hand, I think it makes sense. As a company, you evolve quickly. The space around you is moving quickly. And so you need folks who can adjust their weights. But when I think of Runway, I also think about like maybe like the skill set and the curiosity needs to evolve. But there is a set of North Star that stays the same of culture. And actually, I'll show you. I have my RNA session volume from the last RNA session, which was your research and arts showcase, where people give talks about frontier research in AI and art. So this is an artifact that I own from Runway, but you have all of these artifacts that you create for employees around culture, recruiting swag bags, and very specific books that you give to new hires that represent your values, and Telescope magazine. So I'm curious, given how much you want folks to adjust their model weights, why do you put so much energy into these non-technical initiatives for the people who come and work for you?
Because I think those are the DNA, like the core of who we are and what we do. I don't think of those as like non-technical things. I think Runway is one thing. It does many things, but it's one organization with some principles and some values of how we operate. Making things physically, making things like speaking about them in the ways that you're showing, which is like a physical manifestation of our like vision. It's just who we are. I don't think we want to categorize that as this is different or this is not traditional. I don't think I've ever questioned this. It's just like it emerges from the organization itself, right? It's an emerging property of sorts. Like it's not hard coded. No one said let's do untraditional things and then therefore let's do a book. It was more of like we just came out from the organization.
Of course, we're going to do a book.
Yeah, of course. Why not? You have we have experience in like book publishing, so why not? Like it's there, just do it and learn from it. And I think that's kind of a lot of the initiatives in Runway start like that.
Do you have a sense of how this like culture curation benefits the companies? It sounds like one of it is learning and you get to learn from it, but are there other ways that you see it benefit new employees, for example, as they get used to this new place?
Well, if art and creativity at the center of like who we are and what we do, we breathe that in everything we do as well. And so for someone that might not be as exposed before as to work in creative industries, what better way to see like a lot like we use the product all day. We breathe and are obsessive around the creative avenues and like directions that our users are taking, we are taking, that we can take and help the industry like move. I think it's that embodiment of like you're going to be surrounded by art a lot inside Runway.
And I think you have to love it too.
Yeah, of course. You have to care about it. If you don't, then it's not going to work.
So, speaking of model updating, maybe outside of the people realm, you recently released Gen 3 Alpha. I'm curious to learn a little bit about some of the steps that it took to go from Gen 2 to Gen 3. Were there any challenges in moving on and shipping another model? Yeah,
there are a lot of challenges. Of course, the technical ones. Training these models at this scale has never been done before. And so everything you're doing might feel new. It's hard there's no Stack Overflow. There's no reference where you can go and check what has worked. And so that in itself, I think, is very unique and different. And those are ongoing challenges. I think that's what we love, like solving unsolvable or problems that people might not have encountered before. On the other end, you have models will continue to increase quality, resolution, fidelity, consistency, and so on. But there's a lot of a need for better tools to like control this latent space to steer it in the way that you want to steer it for the type of applications that we want to work on. And that in itself has also its own challenges. If you think of a model as speaking one language and we humans speak another language, like you need to find ways of finding the common ground where you can both speak about the same, like the symbols and the representations and the abstractions need to be matching. If not, you're going to do something and the model might react with something else. And it might not be exactly what you want from a creative standpoint. So the challenge is like, well, how do you find the common language? And again, it's a challenge because no one else has, or we haven't yet built collectively like the tools to navigate these spaces in the most effective ways. And that's why I think like prompt and language on its own is not going to be enough. I think it's the like making films or movies or games or experiences with language is not going to be possible. It's not going to be feasible. It's not going to be the best mechanism. I think there are other ones that we're trying to like invent, and that's also what I'm really excited about.
What are some concrete outside of language that you're excited about? I've heard you talk about music before. I've also seen you more on the, we'll call it generative UI front. So one is maybe a model input and the other is how do you then tweak outputs? But I won't put words in your mouth. What are you excited about?
No, you're right. I think generative interfaces offer a lot of like advantages. So for folks that don't know much about what we're like referring to, but we've been researching a lot about this idea of if you think about any piece of software, that software has been pre-made, pre-created, pre-thought in terms of like where the UIs of the interface will lie and how they will like interact with one another, and the primitives and the grammars of abstraction that you need to make something, right? So if you think about an NLE or 3D software or whatever, an image editing software, you have all of those things kind of baked in because someone built them over time. In a fully generative interface world, you don't have any of those. Depending on what you're working on, the software can adjust itself to present you with the best interfaces. So you might have a slider that it's not, I don't know, a contrast slider, but a slider that changes the attitude or the interactions or the color of your character. And that's a slider that has like, I don't know, character performance as a slider of like more and less, I don't know, energetic. That slider just came up based on your story and your work and has not been made before for anyone else. And it allows you to modify a parameter that depends entirely on what you're making. That in itself feels, I think there's a powerful like concept there, an idea that we're exploring further.
You know, given that there are improvements you can make, you could take an existing model and you can make improvements both on that model, but also on the tools around it and the interface that it has with the humans. And, you know, foundation models are advancing very quickly. So how do you balance pushing the boundaries with new models versus optimizing existing models and the workflows around those existing models? Seems like a tough choices. So
yeah, I think that's it's one of the hardest things these days is to know what to optimize for and what to focus on. I think building products today it's a hard thing because you might be shooting yourself in the foot in terms of focusing on something that might not matter in a couple of months, and realizing that most of the things that you're going to be working on might be futures in a larger, better model over time. So you want to make sure you're not building for a suboptimal point. I think finding if you're doing great in the sense, like, or you're training a model, like the thing they want to avoid is like finding a local maximum or a local minimum, right? So this is kind of similar where like you don't want to find yourself realizing you're the momentum of like the maximum like expression of the thing where you're just in like a local maximum and the maximum is here. But if you build your whole product and company and experience on that point, then when someone else receives this, like it might not matter for you. And so that's I think it's more of a intuition and like an art that you just need to get the organization. It's like you're adjusting your weights again and you get used to it.
Have you ever looked back and thought like, wow, I wasted my time on either a local maximum or I spent time on Model X when I really should have been doing something different?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's what we've learned. That's where you gain the experience because we've done.
You have the intuition from the battle scars.
Exactly. I think you build character out of those like experiences as well, and you build an intuition. You build an experience. And I think experience is hard to learn from a book. It's hard to learn from a talk. An intuition is born out of action and like information that you make by doing things. And so the more you do things, the more you learn. And so again, it's you build those intuitions by making stuff, not by reading it from anywhere else.
Do you have an example that you're willing to share of a time where you're like, we probably spent too much time on this one?
When we were training our first initial set of models on the like generative side, moving away from computer vision more into like generating pixels, we started building like a more traditional NLE, so an editor in the web. And I think the ideas there were that we thought that could be a great way of delivering the models in a much more friendly and like well-known, like
people are used to editors.
Exactly. So it's you just give them, I guess, what they're used to. But I think and we had an amazing roadmap and amazing like sort of like quarterly like objectives and whatsoever. But I think it doesn't matter. Like those things are just like building for the wrong future. They're great suboptimal points where like you're gonna get something, but like it feels like too constrained for what we really wanted to do, and we found ourselves we were kind of building for the past. We were like building for the things that already existed, and I think we're much more interested in like building for the future. And so we learned that because like we just took the wrong assumptions, but I think we're humble enough to recognize those and like understand what worked and what didn't from that.
Yeah, I love that insight, especially in the context of what we just talked about with generative UI, like what is not possible yet from an interface perspective versus what looks like friendly user experience today that they're used to. And maybe trade-off is too strong of a word, but how do you just think about those worlds?
Well, I think I love the history of like art and tool making, and it's easy to forget that most of what we know today, that we think of them as almost institutions and like truths of the world, are not, and not really. Like they weren't there a couple of years ago. We had a bunch of different abstractions and realities of the world. And at the time, we thought that those were like the truths, and that those things should never be changed. And we've seen this in the history of like cinema, where like many things that we thought, like film, you're always going to do things in film, and then digital comes around, and no, you can change. You can use this other thing. But I think the hard thing is for some people to realize that you can change those things. They're not set in stone. It just requires you to like make sure that they work as they intended and they're very useful, and they can deliver some of the same benefits of the previous generation of tools. And so that's our obsession long term, to make sure they're as useful as we can make them to be.
Yeah, I mean, I do think one thing that's underrated is actually moving complex video editing to the browser. It's a pretty bold move. I've edited a lot of videos historically. I would have used something like a Final Cut Pro, and it's a native desktop application. So I'm actually curious, we'll call it exact interface aside, but like why make this choice to move into the browser, and what are the big challenges there?
I think to me these days, like there's not a lot of choices, to be honest. Like the browser is just an extension of like how we do software. It's like the baseline. It's hard to think about any experience today that's not browser-based in some way. Even if you think about native applications, they're probably just like Electron apps that are somehow just like browser extensions or more complex browsers. I think the browser offers a bunch of affordances that traditional software didn't, which is like you can share things, you can make them interactive, you can collaborate in real time. But I think for me, those are not real advantages to just like the baseline where you're starting from. And so I think of those as just like the must, not like, it's where you need to start from.
Okay, so I take back my bold move, and I'll accept this is the default. This
is
the minimum that you need. Okay, but there are some things that maybe you view as a given, like this should be in the browser, it should be collaborative. And then there are some things that I think are open to exploration and, more than the incremental improvement or the technology decision, especially on the model side. So one of the things I'm curious about is, how do you define and pursue a long-term product strategy for technologies that maybe we can't fully envision or touch or see until we train the model yet? And maybe you'll push back on that assumption, but how do you do it?
Well, you run a bunch of experiments. You operate as a research organization, and research organization is not that you just hire researchers. I think we have a studio team, a bunch of people from production and traditional media, and I think of themselves as research scientists. They're experimenting, they're running with assumptions, they're testing things. And so you're adjusting the weights. You're just learning as you go, seeing what works, making a bunch of experiments of things that might not work, and you're okay with it. I think it's that, and like having some sort of a long-term like objective. Like if you don't have an objective to which you're optimizing or like trying to get to, then it might be just chaos. You're just moving with not a lot of like direction. The way I've seen many companies like operate these days is that they want to operate like a research lab, but then they lack the vision, they lack the understanding of what to do with it, and they're looking to the sites to see who else is doing stuff. And I think the mistake there is therefore you just becoming someone else like roadmap. You're just following the paths of someone else. I think for us, it's always making sure that we're following our own path. We started Runway when no one really thought it was worth spending time here, and as you get more people to start thinking about this, it's very important to keep reminding the team of that very long-term aspect of why we're doing this in the first place, and don't get trapped into the things that don't really matter.
You know, I'd imagine right now it's easy to look around, but you all come from the DNA. I know even when you were out fundraising for the first time, I'm sure a lot of folks didn't even know what these technologies were, and now you hear AI in every conversation, generative AI in every conversation.
But I think at some point, most of those things might also, like 4 or 5 years ago from now, there's new things that are happening now that feel rare and different and hard to understand. You might not be paying attention to. I think those are the things that will matter in a couple of years. I think it kind of like everything moves in cycles. So the things that a small group of people were thinking about now have become more mainstream, but there's a bunch of new frontier things that are worth paying attention to that I think long-term will become as kind of more mainstream over time.
Is there anything that you're thinking about kind of on the 5 to 10 year horizon that you're excited about?
Yeah, well, simulations. I think we've been working on this for quite some time, and now I feel it's becoming more obvious to some people that like video is just stepping stone towards something much more interesting, and those are those universal systems of simulations that you can build with these models.
Okay, so I'm curious to talk about those world models, but maybe before that, when thinking about your research org and running experiments, how much does that then play into folks who are building organizations that have research orgs and engineering? They have to make tactical decisions like, how are we going to allocate compute and human resources across pre-training, fine-tuning, inference? When you all are making decisions like that, how does it actually happen behind the scenes?
Well, I think the first thing is every organization is different. So I don't think not all organizations or new software companies or AI companies should be building research from from the ground up. Like pre-training pre-training is pretty expensive. Like we don't need another research lab building like pre-training models for languages. Like I think there are many applications on the like inference side and just post training and fine tuning that might be much more interesting. So how do we do it? I don't think it. Again, there's a long-term aspect of it and a vision, and then there's some intuition we baked in, and there are, I would say, like big bets that we know we're gonna get to, and those big bets get more resources than the like bets that were perhaps more experimental. And the reason for that is that allocating those resources just takes more time, and it's just harder to like manage. And so you want to make sure if you're doing Gen 4 and Gen 5 and Gen 6, then the planning for that takes longer than building some new fine-tuning models or applications on top. And so there's like a judgment on like the impact and the time it takes to train a model. So depending on the scale of it, is it like 4, 6 months in, 8 months in, or this is a month in, we basically define resources based on that.
Something I've heard is that you have an extremely high bar for anything related to external vendors and infrastructure. And so how do you think about being called a full stack organization versus you just said for most organizations, it doesn't make sense to pre-train their own models. Not for all, of course, but I would agree with that. So what does it not make sense for you all to do, and what doesn't make sense for you all to do? And I know that's a really broad question, but you could take it however you want.
I prefer building everything from scratch. That might sound like too much, but sometimes it's not. I mean, we tend to do a lot of it. We tend to build a lot of our infrastructure, like our inference, our training, our data processing stack, and like all of the things that we do are mostly like in-house. We've relied on like more tools as I think the ecosystem has grown. I think building things from scratch helps you build a better intuition as to why do you need them and how to best like optimize for them. At the same time, it's I think first principles like really matter here of like understanding why you're building in the first place. And it also helps you just better debug things. Like if there's an issue at every part of the stack, you can just go in and like change it because you own it. You build it yourself. Now, the counter argument to that is that, well, the trade-off is that it takes time and it's expensive to do. So I agree. If building all of that has definitely taken us a lot of time, but it's worth it if you can afford it to spend time on building those things, and you have that long time horizon.
How much does that need to evolve? Like, I'd imagine there's also, we'll call it economies of scale of the infrastructure as you train new models. How much does that need to evolve as you release new models?
It needs to evolve all the time. You need to be changing all the time. There's new things that we didn't realize for the last generation of models that now are becoming kind of like obvious for us that we need to build. And it's not that we're going to be building chips yet. I don't know, but there's some things that are just like they're good to take and gather from the best partners that you can work with. And I think we're realizing that, of course, in some cases we'll have to just do that because there are other people building great stuff that we can use that will help us just move forward.
I'd love to also hear a little bit about how you're learning and making models better based on customer feedback. But maybe before that, we'll start with, how would you describe your customers? Who is actually using Runway today?
Yeah. We have a lot of different users. We have production, like Hollywood level, AAA studios making $1 million kind of budget movies that are using Runway as part of their processes and tools. We have smaller indie studios making more independent films as well. We have media companies, brands, agencies, a lot of advertisers, and then prosumers like smaller companies and consumers. We have an iPhone app and a product that's also widely used for more individuals and professional creators who just want to make stuff. I think our persona as a user, if you want to think about it like that, is really, if you go back to the mission of the company, like we're here because we want to make tools for like people to tell stories. And so, well, anyone I think is able to tell those stories. Maybe you just haven't found the medium that feels right to you. And I think the promises a lot of these models is that they might be an answer for many of those who hadn't had the chance of finding their creative like expression like medium. And so we want to make sure that those fields can use us, but also companies tell stories, like studios tell stories. And so our broader set of users are composed of anyone who is a storyteller at heart.
Is there any user feedback you've gotten that surprised you, whether it's, data that you're leveraging to make the model better, or talking to a studio that said something that, I know that you're so close to them, really, really understand artists, but people surprise you. So
yeah.
Have you heard anything that's fundamentally, at least a little bit, changed how you think about Runway?
Yeah, there's a few times that I've heard things that have surprised me on use cases, but there's one thing I think has become more evident that I've never thought of, like, because I don't think I was prepared to like predict this. But if you think about if I tell you like movies and videos, most people think of there's an objective like goal to make those things. You're making a movie because you want to be a director. You're like you want to sell tickets to your like show, or if you're making an ad, then there's a product you need to sell. And so video has always been in service of some goal, right? You're making something because something needs to be done, communicated. The thing that's happening now, which I found really interesting that I couldn't have predicted before, is that there's also a kind of new use case, which is people making things for an audience of one, which is yourself. You're making videos, you're making films, not for them to be shared and for you to think of yourself as a filmmaker and an award-winning director that's going to walk in the red carpet, but more for just like your own creative expression. So the analogy I found is, if think about it as perhaps very similar to exercising. You're going to the gym, and I'm sure that 99% of the world goes and exercise and runs and goes to the gym not because they're thinking of themselves as like athletes that are going to go into the Olympics. They're doing it because you just feel good. It's a good exercise for your body, and you like it. It's for yourself. And so these tools and these models and Runway has become for many an exercise for their creative minds. You're exercising your muscles. You're exercising your creative ideas. You're expressing them. You watch them. You like them, and then you move on. Like you don't have to share them. You don't have to like think of them as like a career changing like thing. And we have people who've made tens of thousands of videos for themselves, and they love it. It's great. It's liberating. And I think that's one of the things that really has surprised me, and I keep seeing more and more and more.
I love that. And I think it's like a beautiful example of how making technology easier to use. Like it's very hard to make a movie. It's very hard to make a video. And now it's not so hard. And so to your point on everyone has a story to tell and everyone can be creative, it's just a matter of like, what is the friction and what tools do you have to get there? And now it's easier than it's been before.
No, I mean, you can think of that. That has happened before. This is not the first time we've seen it. I think it's more that we got used to it. I mean, writing was one of the things that only a small group of the world could afford themselves to, well, know how to write and then have the resources to buy like ink and paper and like know how to combine those two things into like, and now just you can do it. You can just buy a pen, you can get your computer and start writing. And many people do it. Many people write for themselves. It's a diary or it's a blog or you're taking notes or creative writing. It's for yourself. You write it because it helps you think. And I think this is a reminder that we've seen this evolution of technology helping people think and augment themselves, and this is just another manifestation of that.
Chris, it sort of reminds me of, did you ever watch Bandersnatch on Netflix by any chance?
Yeah.
Okay, so it was this Black Mirror episode, and it's an interactive film. So viewers like make decisions for the main character. There aren't so many decisions, but if you pick X, it will take you down a different route of the movie. And it came out in 2018, and my expectation was to just see a lot more media that looked like that. And I'm kind of surprised that I haven't really. I was like, oh, interactive movie. I'm going to see this everywhere. Reading your post on world building and generative storytelling, a story that adapts and unfolds in real time based on your actions and choices. And I'm curious how far, like, are we there? How far do you think we are from that? What does that look like at the limit?
I don't think we're there yet. We're very close. I think we're very close to a world where that might look very similar to that. It's a form of. I don't think we have the words to describe it really. We can borrow the language from games and from films to try to get as close as we can to the feeling of what that might look like and feel like. I think it's within reach. It's very close, and I think once we get there, we'll get a better sense of the implications and the consequences and the opportunities of it as well.
How does your interest you mentioned earlier in simulation feed into this?
Well, I think interactive storytelling at that scale is just basically you're running a large simulation under some parameters and like conditions, but it's basically a world that you're moving through, and you want to build a system that understands how to simulate the interactions of the systems and the agents and the behaviors of that world.
One of the things I'm curious about when thinking about giving more, we'll call it like agency to the viewer, like in the Bandersnatch example, and when we're talking about simulations and world building, is how do you keep that original DNA that we talked about of the artist? I know that you do a lot of work around putting artists first in Runway, and maybe work is not the right word because it's natural, just like these artifacts that we talked about. But what are you doing right now to continue developing the DNA in lockstep with artists as they're getting used to these really new technologies in their spaces? Maybe you could talk a little bit about Lionsgate too.
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, the word art has always been associated with like a visual like element. When I say I went to art school, people think I went to like painting school. There's different sorts of like art and different like, modus of expression. I think many people can think of themselves as artists that are doing non-traditional things and expressing themselves in ways that are not the things that we tend to associate like art with. I think sometimes software is art, and if you have great artists building software, you're going to build great things. And so I like to think of I guess ourselves as building for that larger creative class. Like creativity if you think of art as an expression of creativity, creativity is a state of mind. It's a way of looking at the world. And you can build, for many people who you might not consider traditional creatives, but they still have that latent potential and they still are creating their own discipline. And so at Runway, our software engineers, many of them are actually artists on their own right. And that I think has always helped us like think about the company in a very slightly different way. But more precisely, guys, going to more directly to your question, is I think we're building for that creative world, and the creative world has known disciplines in the art world, and we want to make sure we can work with them really closely. So Lionsgate is a partnership we've announced very recently, where we are working with their talent team and their creative team to help them use and understand how to use these tools the best way possible and to create custom things for their own kind of like pipeline. And then there's many more that we have that are in that similar like vein, helping studios, agencies, professionals understand these tools and the opportunities they offer. We will always do that because that's who we are. It's a company made by artists for artists.
Is that something that you're seeing a lot of studios want? Are you seeing folks like embrace this new world of AI? And by folks, I mean studios, producers, directors, actors, actresses.
Yeah, I think many are embracing. Many are realizing that look, AI has always been painted as a binary kind of like technology, where like it's either the best thing we've ever collectively built, or we're gonna like destroy the world. And there's no middle ground. It's either one or two. Pick a side. You're in the side of humans or in the side of like robots. And like I think that's a very silly, polarizing like way of painting technology, and AI is not that. It's a very powerful tool. It has a lot of challenges, yes, but it also has a lot of opportunities, and you'll get a better sense of how useful this will be for your own job if you use it. I think many of the apprehensions and like fears around AI come from a fictional place, from a place of many people who've never experienced it before. And many times I've seen people thinking the wrong things about what these models do, what Runway does, and how it works. People think that you just get a script and you put it into Runway and it makes a movie for you. I wish it was. I wish it was that easy, But you have to be in control. You're in the steering wheel. You have to like take it. And I think what we're seeing right now is more people driving and understanding how to take the steering wheel and what it means and where you can go and where it actually will take you and where it will not. It won't work for everything, but it will work for a lot of different things. And so I think it's becoming more clear that it's a very powerful tool. And right now it's the moment where I think we're at the breaking point where more people are realizing that if you know how to use it, it can be very powerful.
If you could wave a magic wand and change something about what you can do with media and creativity and AI, sort of fast forward, what is something that we can't do today that you would love to be able to do tomorrow?
It's a good question. What is something that we would love to do today that we can do? I think if you go to a set and if you go and watch like a film being made with actors and like with the crew, you realize that it's a very collaborative environment where you might have a director or a set designer speaking about what they want. They might be using references of other films, or sometimes you make a book that has all the like research about characters and maybe the art that you want, the direction that you want, and the collective crew has learned all of those things. And so when you're looking at a scene and you're shooting something kind of like everyone knows or might know, and you might refer different things and you might speak, you might use body language. I want to live in a world where you have a model that understands what you're trying to build in a very similar way. Because right now, the way we're interfering with or working with the models is just mostly language based. And I feel that that's like sitting at a director's seat and like
trying to type up what everyone wants.
Yeah, being unable to like move your hand, being unable to like walk, being unable to like mention sounds and references of art, you're just sitting there like writing, right? And with text. And it feels like very constrained. Like there's some things like cameras and movements that you want to like describe your hands. Like you want to move things, the way you express things do matter a lot. And I think we're going to get to a point where I want to have a system that feels like a thought partner in a very similar way, can sit with you and understand much more than just your language.
Within your team in Runway, do you all, because I know taste is such an important part of getting the model right and having output that you feel good about. How do you know it's working? Are there debates around this looks great. This isn't what I like.
Well, the thing about art and taste is that it's subjective. So, um, I think that's one of the things that you can really buy. Like you can get many GPUs, you can get many engineers, and you can do a lot of things. But like if you don't have taste, there's many companies these days building without taste, and I think you can buy taste. It's just like embedded in who you are, and I think one of the things that will matter a lot is knowing what to build, how to build it, and also how to like choose will become being a curator is hard.
Well, Chris, we're out of time, but I would love to hear how building Runway has changed you as a leader and as a person.
Uh, yeah, that's a great question. I think I love learning, and I think Runway has taught me that if you surround yourself with smart, kind people, you can learn and continue to learn more. And I think what Runway has shown me is that the things that you might have thought were impossible, I've never thought I will build a company. I never thought we'll do the stuff that we're doing. But I think if you just have the right mindset and the right approach and find good, talented people to work with, you can do amazing stuff.
I love that. Thank you so much.
Of course.